Welcome to the Lift Every Voice podcast, where we explore books by contemplative writers of color. I'm Christine Valters Paintner.
And I'm Claudia Love Mair. We are joined each month by the author of our book club selection. Together, we explore how increasing our diversity of perspectives on contemplative practice can enrich our experience of the Christian mystical tradition.
We encourage you to join us by reading the book, listening to the conversations, and engaging with the reflection questions on our website at abbeyofthearts.com. Welcome, everyone, to our Lift Every Voice book club. And this month's conversation is with Jamie McGhee, and we are focusing on this beautiful book, You Mean It or You Don't, James Baldwin's Radical Challenge. And Jamie explores how Blackness is constructed, deconstructed, and policed around the world. Her work has been supported by art fellowships from Harvard University, MIT, Zurich University of the Arts, and Folger Shakespeare Library. She has also received artistic residencies at Künstlerdorf Schöppingen in Germany, La Maison Baldwin in France, Nawat Fez in Morocco, and Instituto Sacatar in Brazil. McGhee lives in Berlin, where she teaches writing at Humboldt Universität. So we're delighted to have you with us, Jamie.
I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for having me.
So Claudia Love, why don't you kick us off?
Jamie, we always ask our guests to tell us about their spiritual journey. So, what is your story? When did your love affair with James Baldwin begin, and why this book right now?
Thank you for the question. So my story, spiritually at least, was very legalistic and Catholic. I think like quite a few people, especially growing up in the southern United States, which is kind of like known for being, it can be religiously dogmatic, let's say, in certain regards. And I definitely grew up in that space. I grew up as raised Catholic, and then my family transferred to a more evangelical megachurch style, which was a lot less legalistic, but it was a very almost jarring shift going from all of the intense rules of Catholicism to an environment that was more, it's like free and open and sing songs and raise your hands. So I'm really grateful that I've had both experiences. And then I think I've had to sort of find my way in between all of those, especially then realizing that I'm queer, which then kind of made me rethink my place in the world and everything I thought. Because I definitely thought I was one person until I became a teenager and realized like, oh, okay, like, and maybe everything I thought about the Catholic Church doesn't quite apply to me, or maybe I have to find my own way of being or of worshiping and find different communities that will welcome me the way that I am. And so I think then my life, at least the past several years, has been a sort of a negotiation of trying to find the comfort and the ritual of things like Catholicism, and but also try to find the freedom that I found within more evangelical spaces, but then also try to find something that's queer and focused on social justice. And I've definitely been finding a lot more of those communities popping up. I think honestly, since 2016, I've seen like a rise. Since Trump's first election, seen a rise of more people like focusing on social justice and religion and actually putting their feet where their faith is. And so, yes, it's been a roundabout journey, but I've ended up here in Berlin now, which, not necessarily the most spiritual place in a traditional sense, but very spiritual in terms of activism and art. So right now, worshiping God in that way, finding my way. And then in terms of why James Baldwin, I'd always grown up reading bits and pieces of him, or a couple of quotes here and quotes there. In school, high school, we were never allowed to read any of his real queer works or his entire works. It was more just like, here's what he says on like race and racism, isn't it great? And then don't look at any more context around that or who he was. And it actually wasn't until university when I found out more about who he was the person, and when I stereotypically read Giovanni's Room, that I became interested in the man first and then his writing. And I think even now I'm almost more fascinated by Baldwin as a person than I am about than like the individual things that he wrote. which obviously he's an amazing writer, but I think that his writing is a production of everything that he had to endure in order to get to that place and become that sort of artist. Um, and then the third question, what was it again? Oh yeah, why
Why?
this book? Why now? Thank you. Um, the book began in 2016. That was a fun time. Trump's first election.
Mm.
Yeah, it began actually as a prayer project. I was a senior in university with my writing partner, Dr. Hollowell, and he was talking about how he was sort of being, because he being a straight white Christian man at the university, and me being this like queer black artist girl, he was kind of wondering like what his role can be in social justice and fighting back, and like I think like a lot of people are like what now, what do we do, and kind of the conclusion we came to was like we both don't really know what to do and we're feeling lost in different regards, in different ways, and so we kind of had, okay, what if we, one, pray about it, and then two, look at what James Baldwin says, because he's, everyone says look, turn to Baldwin, and neither of us had like really dove deep into him. So we did both of those things, put it together, became sort of a prayer project, and then in 2022, a publisher came, saw the project, and was like, okay, what if you, like, it's been 6 years since then. Like, okay, like, what do you, would you want to like update it and expand it and like talk about now? And before then, it was more focused on prayer and what you can do as a person internally, to sort of cope with everything going on, or to try to be kinder and try to find ways to move forward through the world in the dark times. And this book, the current version, is definitely more focused on action and like, great, you prayed, great, now like do something now. Um, and I think it's in. I'm glad it took the path that it did. I'm glad that it started with prayer, and I'm glad that it did not just end in prayer, I'll say.
That's amazing. I definitely got hit hard with the action.
I'm glad that it did its
I
job.
got, I got to put my money where my mouth is. Um, Let me ask you about your Catholic and even the mega church kind of experience, because mine is the opposite. I went
Oh,
from evangelical and mega churches to Catholic, but it was a Black Catholic church that had, a very particular charism.
mhm.
So was it a Black Catholic
It
church
was
that
a Black Catholic church,
okay,
yeah.
all right. This is
Well, it was
definitely a different
actually,
flavor.
yeah, agree. It was actually, we had a Black Catholic church we went to, but then we had a white Catholic church right by our house, St. Gabriel's, which was a very different vibe, which I didn't even like step foot inside there till I was like 10, because I thought, Black Catholic church, at least we still have like music and it's still, and then the white Catholic church is like, oh, it's a lot of stained glass. It's a lot of like, oh, I can't touch anything. It's a different feeling. Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like you're just Episcopalian now.
At that point. Exactly.
It seems to be the direction I'm headed in. Thank you so much.
So Jamie, you mentioned about the action, and I think that was such a powerful part of this book is that you have such really concrete, well-developed calls to action at the end of every chapter. They're very specific. They're very specific to the US, but of course you can glean it for other countries, and now you live in Germany. So I wonder if you have some advice for someone picking this book up, for the first time, and maybe they haven't really been involved that much in action, and it could be a little overwhelming because there's so many great suggestions. How do you suggest that someone like that begin?
I would say, at least I could usually say like what I would do picking up a book like this or similar books is I usually skim through it all, but then go back to the chapters that really spoke to me.
Yeah.
Like for example, like look at this one, I'm really passionate about like queer rights. So I would probably personally, like I would focus on one specific thing, like the thing that gets my blood boiling the most, or it could be the thing that I'm most familiar with. Like so in my example would be something like queer rights, where if I've never really jumped into that space in a social justice sense before, at least I've been around there and it's more comfortable and familiar. So I think in general, I would say, yeah, start with what you're interested in, if something like catches your eye, and then also only do like one small thing. It could be one small thing off the list. Don't push yourself to do everything all at once, because that is a recipe for burnout. And also say you can, if nothing on the list really speaks to you, you can like tweak it a little bit or like find a way to make it like you don't have to take it a dogmatic sense. These are like for each chapter, it's not like now do these 5 things or else you're a bad activist. It's like no, like here are some ideas to start thinking in a direction. And I think also part of the point of the book is to see that there's more than one way to get involved. That's why we don't have like one I like at the end of the chapter. It's not like do this one thing or else. It's more like here are different ways in, and kind of the point is to spark creativity and make you start thinking that there can be a place for you within many of these movements to however you might want to get involved. Um, so I'm really hoping that it's a book that sparks like I would say creativity and intrigue in people and a desire to just like try things out.
Yeah, creativity and intrigue is a great way to put it. And I love that. I love the wisdom to either choose what you're familiar with, so going to the place where you feel really comfortable and at ease, or that's like the real kind of core of what you're wanting to fight for, and or like the thing that really riles you up or makes you really angry.
I guess two
Maybe,
opposite sides of the spectrum. It's
yeah,
fine.
maybe start with the ease and the familiarity first and work your way into that. But yeah, no, I think that's really great. Thanks for that. And such great, yeah, like I said, such great advice, such great calls to action in this book.
Thank you.
So, You Mean It or You Don't opens with the story of teenage preacher Baldwin leaving the pulpit to embrace his life as an artist. Very relatable. I was a teenage preacher. Um, and at 60, I feel like once again I'm choosing to commit to what I must do, but I don't know how, like Baldwin. And I think many of us right now, because of the high velocity of things that are happening in the world, it's like, whoa, now I got to do this. That wasn't on my 2025 bingo card. Um, what are the barriers that people face most when wanting to dive into justice work? And for me, you know, especially dealing with the prison system, when I've never even been to jail, um, and what working with particular marginalized groups could mean, for my reputation. I'll just be honest, what certain things are going to cost. And, for me, there's a lot of fear. And, who am I about to, you know, uh, hitch my wagon to? Who am I about to engage with that could be dangerous? That, I'm just in this process of counting up the cost of justice work. Remember in 2020, I was very sick and I wanted to get out there for Black Lives Matter. And my daughter was like, no, ma'am, you can't even run. So, no, you will not be going out there. And here in Kentucky is where Breonna Taylor lived. And so there was a cost to even the thought of getting on the front lines of justice. And I know there are many ways to engage in social action and social justice. So, what are these barriers that people face, and what advice do you have, for us scaredy cats?
Um, Barriers, definitely, I think there are quite a few. I think right now a lot of people see everything going on and want to help, but then just don't. Like I said, like you don't or can't for many reasons. I think one, you kind of mentioned, there's so many things flying at you from so many directions. Like you open the news on any one day and there are like 4 different things going on, or Trump has said this, or Trump has that, or there's this happening and that. And I think that just sort of a almost decision fatigue of that, or like decision paralysis of like I want to do something, but I don't know what because like something that I'm seeing a lot of with people who haven't really stepped into the space before. Like they know something must be done, but when you're being attacked from every direction, like where do you defend first? And I think that's, at least in my circles, that's definitely something I've seen come up. I also think that there can be a helplessness, and maybe it is a learned helplessness of like, especially seeing that people who are standing up are getting then deported or arrested, or their lives are getting harder, doing depending on like the work that you're doing. Um, or yeah, there's so much, I guess, there's always been a danger in it, but especially in this current administration, there's even more of a danger and even more of a cost with certain political actions. So then there are people who are genuinely afraid for themselves or their families or for their visa status. And I think that's also very fair. And then I think on the less militant, scary side, some people are just like afraid of getting it wrong. I think like people like want to get involved, like, oh, like what if I make it worse? Or then I've also talked to, I think we also mentioned in the book, like well-meaning white people who then want to get involved in anti-racist work but don't want to take up space or don't want to see something wrong or don't want to like do this or that or like is it my place to do this? I think people can kind of like what if and what about their way out of actually making action. And I think the intentions are good, but then if they don't know the way forward, then the result is the same. People don't get involved. Um, and so I and so when you say like tips for, well, you called yourself a scaredy cat, but I don't think it is a scaredy cat. You said like counting the cost. I think it's true. It does cost something. Like every time you stand up, that does cost something, and it's good to be aware of that. And sometimes the cost is too high in a certain moment or too high to do certain things. Like I wouldn't fault anyone who's worried about their visa status. I would not fault them, for example, for not going out on the street and protesting, if that could then get them beaten up or deported or anything. Like there's a very real cost. Um, so I think that my advice would be sort of to go back to what you said and count that cost and see if, that is something that you can pay right now. And if you can't, then that's okay and be gentle with yourself and see what you can do. And like right now, for example, the internet is obviously being used to track a lot of activists and a lot of work going on, but there are also a lot of really great initiatives that are helping people, for example, with like privacy settings and to be able to organize things and like take their names off of things. And so those are routes forward. Like even if you can't, for example, be on the front lines or you can't like run, you can't be there physically, there are other ways in. And I think that does take some time and some creativity to maybe figure out those ways that have maybe a lower cost. But I do think that work is being done, and I think getting plugged into that is opening up a lot of pathways for a lot of people. So for anyone who's worried, I would say look into more non-traditional ways of fighting back because we also kind of need that sort of creativity now in the current administration.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Especially Black people here in America, it really does seem like this administration is trying to bait us to get out in the street, and we're like, nah, um, because we
Like,
know
we'll
the
sit this one
threat.
out.
Right, right. We saw what happened in 2020. We know the threat of martial law is there and what it means. So we're just like, mm-mm. I'm I've actually seen so many more of my white friends expressing maybe for the first time this willingness to put their bodies on the line. Yeah, like something we always did. And it's just a really interesting, it's a really interesting time to see other people counting a cost that we have paid again and again and again while we kind of, and it's not like simply sitting things out, it's using the wisdom that the ancestors have provided for us, and kind of strategizing in a way that we really haven't had to, um, in this particular way. We would not have survived chattel slavery if there hadn't been this, okay, well, we can't all be Nat Turners. But it's just a really interesting time. But thank you for that.
I agree with that. That is a sentiment I've heard also more and more from like white friends or white activists in the space, kind of even looking at the administration. Statistically on paper, Black people, we did our job. We voted. We didn't vote for him. I feel like we
Right.
did. And so I have seen that, at least online, I've seen that sentiment coming up more and more of like this now Black people not at fault. Like this is one of the ones we can take our bodies out of the equation for a bit. Like we've done our job. We've been on the front lines. We've gotten beat up and tear gas and everything else. Like we didn't do this one. Like
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that. I want to talk a little bit more specifically about Baldwin now. And I really loved the chapter series as a heart attack. It was one of my favorites. And you have this quote here, this is about the day after the confrontation with reality, and not just days, but weeks, months, and years after. This chapter is about building sustainable, restorative avenues of justice in a broken world. It's also about living into new habits and practices that address our brokenness too. So I wonder if you could share a bit about the situation in Baldwin's life that sparked this chapter, what led to that, and then anything that else you'd like to say. I think what moved me so much was about just how we're on this long human journey, and there are these moments where we confront reality in a new way, and we are vulnerable, and we are then called to move forward. And so I'd love to hear a little bit more about kind of Baldwin's wisdom from that, and then what you've sort of gleaned from that.
Sorry, taking time to collect my thoughts. It was a very good question. Very
Yeah, no, take your time.
In terms of, I guess I'll sort of start with what I've gleaned, because I've gleaned what I've gleaned through Baldwin. And obviously the time that he's growing up through was in many ways very similar to our time, in terms of obviously the same issues that exist now existed then, but even more so, and even more violently, even more in technicolor. I think, that said, I think that the confrontation with reality, with a lot of people, started like on a sort of national consciousness level. I think started with Trayvon Martin, at least in terms of Black rights, in a new way. Obviously, like, there'd always been activists fighting for this, but I think like the current moment, a lot of ways, started in 2012, and then again with Trump happened, and things exploded like 2016, and then a giant Black Lives Matter push again in like 2020, and I think one thing I keep coming back to, and question-wise, is about, we keep having in the US these realizations, let's say, these confrontations with reality, like with Trayvon Martin, with Black Lives Matter, with like we keep seeing like there keep being breaking points, and people keep saying like, oh my God, or things keep like going viral, like, oh, how could this happen, and everything, and I think even now obviously under Trump's second term, things are, with ICE, taking a much darker turn than it took during his first term, but some of the sentiment, some of the rhetoric is still the same, in terms of people being shocked at things that are happening. But every 4 years, this sort of like, at least since 2012, this has been happening, this like general nationwide shock. And so one thing that I think I maybe struggle with a bit, or think about, let's say, is the idea that you can have these big confrontations with reality, but then if you don't build, as Baldwin says, sustainable, restorative avenues of justice, then that anger is going to fade away, and you're not going to be able to move forward. You're just going to, things will fizzle out and continue under the surface, and then you have new confrontation with reality when like things start happening, and another violent outburst happens. And so I think it's especially important now that people stay shocked about the things that are happening now, but then also find a way to turn that shock into something more sustainable, to make sure that in like 2028, we're not again having these same conversations of like, oh my God, I can't believe what's happening now. It's like unprecedented times. And I think maybe, I don't want to generalize. I definitely don't want to generalize. And I guess it's also difficult being a person not situated in the US at this time. So I can kind of only speak on what happens when I spend time there, when I go back, or like what the discourse happening in my friends and colleague circles that are happening. But there does seem to be the US seems to be really good at national outrage, but not everyone is really good at sustainable change, I'll say.
Yeah.
That was a very roundabout way, but I had to.
No, I think you got us there, and I think the journey sort of just speaks to the way in which we are kind of wrestling, as a culture and individually with the, like everything feels worse than the last thing, and it's like it feels inconceivable it could happen again. And I really appreciate what you're saying about letting the shock and anger not just kind of numb you or like send you back to where you were, but to actually let it galvanize you and and carry you forward into new possibilities.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, that's the hope. That's the hope. I
Thanks,
think we
Jamie.
can. I think it definitely can be done.
Yeah.
I want to ask you about something that has been very convicting for me. I'm 5 years ago, a man contacted me at my other job about working with him as a writer. That he was completely well established, didn't need my help at all. I found out later he just thought I was cute and wanted to meet me. But anyway, I did meet him when he came out of prison just last month or 2 months ago. And the thing is, he was accused of a heinous crime. The Innocence Project has determined after a year-long investigation that he's factually innocent. And as you know, this happens to Black, brown, and poor people all the time, to be falsely accused. The prison industrial complex benefits from people being in prison doing work, making 80 cents a day. And the particular crime he was accused of was sodomizing a child. And he used his prison time, 20 years, to become a better man. Like Malcolm X, he came out of prison greater, with a servant's heart. It was like a monk's cell. And we were talking about the restrictions on his life, even though the Innocence Project found him innocent of what he was charged with, they could not exonerate him. And so now they are working, the politics in Kentucky are crazy. Now they're working, trying to get the governor to give him a full unconditional pardon. But until that happens, he is still a registered sex offender. And he can't travel 22 miles to Lexington without travel papers like enslaved people had to have to go from one plantation to another. We can't be in a official relationship until he gets permission from parole officer, then therapist, then accountability buddy. So we didn't even get permission to go see the movie Sinners. And so there are all of these crazy restrictions. And he was telling me how a friend of his from prison had set a daycare on fire to get back at his girlfriend. He thought nobody was in there, but there was an older Black woman and a child. The, the woman escaped, the child was killed. He did his time. He gets out of jail. He can move next door to a daycare if he wants to. He can go to the movies with and he can love whoever he wants to love. And so my friend was telling me how the restrictions for sex offenders can be so severe, and more so here in Kentucky. And then he started telling me about how he's worked with men like this, with their writing, telling their stories, how he's found some of these men to be deeply regretful of their actions. And he gave such a compassionate take on sex offenders that it upset me. I was like, no, I did not want to be compassionate. I want Jesus to love the marginalized people I love, and then I want Jesus to hate the marginalized people I hate, not the sex offenders, honey. Um, and and it really challenged me because Jesus was always around what society felt like were the worst people. And I'm having such trouble reconciling, just being very transparent. How do you how do you live like Jesus? How do you love like Jesus? You know, See, it's easy to love him because I know he didn't do it. But what about the person who did? What is my response to that? And uh, I don't know, Jamie, help me out.
I don't know what.
I don't want to love bad people. I want to love ones.
real easy questions. Thanks for that.
Oh no.
I think, because you sent me this question earlier, and I actually did think about it a lot because it's quite a difficult. Because I know like what I want to believe on paper. I want to say, oh, just I want to say, oh yeah, just pray about it. God will soften your heart. It'll be fine. I want to believe, but I know in practice things are definitely not nearly that simple in what we want with our heads and what we actually feel in our hearts than what we do with our hands. It can be totally different things. So I guess I can only say my general approach and to I think that the people that I'm not instantly inclined to love and feel sympathy for, in general. For me, it's always been books. Like it's always been things like reading the memoirs, or like if he's helping people write their books, then I'll usually like read their books to try to at least understand the the decisions and thought processes that led them there. It's so I'll use an example. It's not the same at all, I know. But I'm like my training is in novel writing, and then we're always told that like there's no real evil person. Like no one really thinks that they're evil, and everyone obviously has like, and not that people aren't necessarily innocent, but that when we're creating a character in a novel, we always have to think about, okay, but why did the people like do the things they did, even if they're abhorrent things? Like, what were they trying to protect? What were they trying to prove? Or like, what wound were they trying to heal? Like, why did they do what they did? And then in creating a character, you don't have to like that person, but you do have to understand why they did that thing. And then obviously we're talking about real people here, so it's very different. But I challenged myself to try to attempt to think about people in the same way sometimes to try to have more empathy. Like everyone does have a reason for doing what they did, and a lot of times it's like it could be terrible reasons, but for some people like they have grown or they have changed or the reason made sense or they're brought up a certain way. So people don't have to like be forgiven, but at least they can be better understood. um, I was listening to a podcast and they mentioned this documentary called Pervert Park, which uh, is about everyday lives of sex offenders struggling to reintegrate into society and sort of goes into, yeah, I haven't seen it, but I've heard that it's supposed to be really powerful, like goes into their past and like some people like the cycle of abuse and like why abused people like re-abuse and everything that happened. And I don't think it changed people's minds to be like, yeah, I fully like forgive and everything that happened is fine, but more to understand the cycles that led people to the decisions that they made. Um, and then if we work on like breaking those cycles, which I know is a lot easier said than done. Um, I think also I keep coming back to like Baldwin and his approach to things and just the fact that he wrote so much about so many people who were despised at the time. Like in even Giovanni's room, obviously like different scales of things, but you know, in the US at that point, gay people were considered perverts. And you know, now obviously we don't think, oh, not everyone thinks there are still, you know, some homophobes and bigots. Um, but Giovanni's room, I like to think, did open some people's eyes up to just the fact that like they are humans, you don't like agree. Obviously, I'm not comparing the two. I'm not saying the same things, like consensual homosexual relationships, and you know, actual sex offense. But I think in some people's minds they were kind of the same until they read Baldwin or until they read things like that. And I do think that narrative is really powerful in that sense. And so to anyone, I guess, who wants to maybe try to develop like a slightly softer heart for certain populations, I would at least say maybe go like try to find novels, or try to find books, or try to find memoirs, just try to find some sort of stories around that, try to like, step into their head, even if it's just for an afternoon, and see where that takes you.
You anyway. Y'all pray for me. Pray for you.
We'll pray for you.
Yeah, no, I love that response, Jamie, because I agree that our art is really like the doorway into empathy, isn't it? And the way that we discover, yeah, you know, try to understand the lives of people that we have nothing in common with.
Thank you for
Since you've
taking my roundabout and summing it up very nicely. I appreciate that.
That's what I'm here for. Just I like going on the journey though, but yeah, so I want to maybe talk about queerness for a moment, since you've mentioned it a couple of times, and I know it's a topic that's important for you, and of course for, you know, all of the members of our community as well. But you talk about queerness as a way of relating to the world that makes room for creativity, curiosity, and new ways of being. It makes space for fluidity and experimentation. And then you talk about Mihi Kim Court's book, which we both loved, and we had her on this podcast. And I love this idea of expanding the definition of queerness to make it something to give us a lens into how it's really a way of like standing on the edges of life and being able to expand beyond that, right? It's a way of being able to um, push the boundaries. I wonder if you can tell us a little bit more about kind of what queerness means to you, and yeah, why is it something we could celebrate?
To me, I think queerness is sort of the pursuit celebration of liberation.
Mm.
It is pushing boundaries, but it's also, I think, for me personally, it's more about the freedom to decide. Like there are some queer people who then feel very comfortable within certain boundaries, and others who want to be far outside of it, and some people who want to go back and forth. And the whole point of queerness is sort of a breaking away of the change, the boundaries, and the ability to choose for yourself and to have fun in that choice.
Yeah. Yeah. Isn't fun and play really important too? An
Yeah.
important part of all of that. Yeah. And I love your distinction about having the freedom to choose where we stand on that whole spectrum. And do we have a sense from Baldwin, what I know the idea behind queerness and homophobia was much different when he was writing, but what do we learn from him about this?
Baldwin never outright declared and clarified what his sexuality was. Like we know, like he was queer and he had relationships with men, but he also said he can fall in love with women, and which I think is a very queer stance to take. Um, and I don't know. I think that personally speaks to the sort of person that he was, and that he had such an open mind and an open heart for so many things. And I think it helped him write so with so much humility and tenderness and love because he didn't box himself in. I think he took a queer stance with sexuality, yes, but then also had a queer outlook on the world, in terms of he was always different and always questioning things and always pushing back. And so I think queerness can be more than just like who you are, how you present, who you sleep with. It can also be very much challenging yourself to look at the world differently. And I think that's part of the reason he's still so relevant today, because he's still challenging people today, to rethink what queer is.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think that's a great distinction too. That idea that it's certainly not just about our sexuality and about who we sleep with. It's really about more of like a larger perspective on the world.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think it can be. I think you did that
Yeah.
really well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
Jamie, I think community is the cheat code for survival in the kind of crises that is happening worldwide. The helpers, Mr. Rogers' helpers, are at risk of safety, and people are suffering. You know, here in the US, many people are going to lose Medicaid. They are talking about taking away um, Social Security, something that they're calling an entitlement program where people have paid their entire lives into Social Security. And we had this terrible congresswoman, when one of her constituents said, "Hey, if you cut off Medicaid, people are going to die," and she was like, "Well, everybody
Oh my
dies."
God.
And then she did a really awful apology that was so trolling in a cemetery, and I couldn't believe just like what I was seeing from this person who follows up with, if you're afraid of death, you can meet my Lord Jesus Christ. And I was like, oh my gosh, this woman is horrible. And so I want to ask you about mutual aid and how we take care of each other. And a lot of people don't know exactly what mutual aid is, but can you talk to us about the benefits of mutual aid, of living in community, um, as a subversive act, and just taking care of one another?
Thank you for that. Sick community is survival and so important right now. And I also saw that woman's remarks in the cemetery, and
Mm.
oh, the blood was boiling for a little bit. It still is, but it's okay. Oh, but in terms of mutual aid, I do think it is subversive because that's another form of survival. It obviously goes hand in hand with community. Um, Says the world is trying to kill us, trying to starve us, trying to push us down. But we won't let it because we're going to stand together in this. Right now, we could easily turn against each other, fight for limited resources, but mutual aid is very much a no, we'll pool our resources. And like if I have a little more, I'll give, and like if you have, you'll give, and we'll also see how we can help each other. It can be food, it can also be so many things. It can be mutual aid, could just include driving your elderly neighbor somewhere if she needs to go somewhere, or like taking care of kids if someone needs to do something. Like it's really it can really just be like community involvement. It can be so many things. Like anything right now that's keeping people afloat, I think can count as mutual aid. And what was the second part of the question?
I don't know.
Okay.
I went off script.
Oh no, it's fair.
I wanted you to just actually share more about what mutual aid looks like.
Okay,
So, we're all good.
one thing I wanted to say too is that in Berlin, I think a lot of places in the US, there are official places you can sign up for mutual aid programs or look like online. If you want an official thing, like sometimes for example, if you have more privilege and don't necessarily know how to then use that in a good way, to just look online and see through official channels. But also one thing that I've been really interested in lately is especially through things like TikTok and things like people like reaching out directly and saying, "Hey, I need this thing," or can you donate to this, or like, I'm looking like, does someone have a contact for this? Like, there's a lot of grassroots reaching out and a lot of roots need out there. So I think that's another avenue. It's really good to be able to go through like official mutual aid programs or community if you want to, but also even just if you happen to see something like you're scrolling on TikTok or online, like someone needs help now, and you take 10 minutes and you give that help, I think that's also a form of mutual aid. It really just however you put yourself out there to help someone else, even if it's just for 5, 10 minutes, that counts as mutual aid. It's whatever we're doing to keep each other afloat right now.
Love that. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Jamie. I think maybe we'll bring the conversation to a close here because I think we've covered quite a lot of ground, and I just want to highly recommend this book, You Mean It or You Don't, James Baldwin's Radical Challenge and Jamie's Radical Challenge. So we've been having this conversation. Claudia loves Radical Challenge too. I feel very blessed to be amongst such wise women. So thank you, Jamie. It's been just really a delight to have this conversation with you.
Thank you again for having me on. It's been great talking to you both. Give me a lot to think about question-wise. But I appreciate it. So thank you.